The story that I want to tell you today starts with a pretty depressing outlook, but hopefully by the end of the session you will think or understand that we do have the solutions to some of the challenges that we're facing. And actually it links very nicely to what you've heard this morning, and particularly from Ian's presentation that talks about how we manage the risks, how we control the things that are within our gift to control, and that if we actually do that well, that creates what I would describe as competitive, sustainable advantage. So, where do we start? We start literally with a food system that is broken. And it doesn't matter which lens you look at this food system, whether it's plastic packaging that is polluting our oceans and that means that there'll be more weight of plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050, whether it's the amount of land that we're using for agriculture and the fact that 70% of fresh water that is extracted on the planet is extracted to use for agriculture. And the fact that a quarter of all of that land and that water is used to feed animals, and that's not a particularly efficient way of going about things. Whether it's the fact that we waste food and that 1 billion people, and perhaps more, go to bed hungry every night, whereas the rest of the world is basically over-caloried, obese, and suffering with the challenges of diet-related disease. All of those things mean that if we carry on the way that we are, we simply don't have the land, the water, or the resources to produce food for the future. So it's got to change. And even if you didn't believe this was a rational argument and you don't believe in climate change, delivering all of that with the backdrop of climate change and what that means to the stress on the system, you would say there is a very, very strong argument here. The other aspect of this is that NGOs, charities, campaigners, all over the world are now campaigning on this topic. And I use this example. It's in the UK. It's an organisation called the Food Foundation. It's a pretty young organisation. As a charity, it's about 8 years old, but it's having a profound impact on both government and policymakers as well as retailers. Every year, they produce this report called The Broken Plate, and it talks about the broken food system and literally holds every business to account and scores them on all sorts of different aspects. But it's not just retailers and consumers that are the beneficiaries of these kind of reports. It's investors as well, and banks, lenders. And I don't know if any of you have come across the World Benchmarking Alliance, but the World Benchmarking Alliance does exactly the same thing for 250 food businesses across the globe and gives them a score which then investors and lenders use to basically rate whether they will lend money and invest in those businesses. And then there is Share Action. And again, I don't know if many of you read the grocery press, but Share Action are basically a group that buys shares in food companies, essentially campaign and then turn up at their annual general meetings and ask the board directors difficult questions. And their most famous piece of work recently was around Nestle and forcing a vote at the AGM on Nestle setting targets to sell healthier foods. And this came straight at the time that Nestle had just launched a Kit Kat breakfast cereal in the UK, which kind of made front page headlines for all the wrong reasons. There's one I haven't put on here, and you may have heard about this in the press, and it's one that's happening in America at the moment from Client Earth. And Client Earth are a group of solicitors who take companies to court. And Client Earth are taking basically the big fossil fuel, oil and gas producers in the US to court for what they're calling the zombie oil wells. And these are the oil wells that basically big oil companies sold on when those oil wells were at the end of their life. And through a series of sell-offs down the chain, these oil wells ended up in the hands of small businesses that went bankrupt and therefore could not close down properly those oil wells. And those oil wells now are emitting methane, they're emitting oil and gas leaking, they're polluting land, a lot of it farmland, and they are a disaster. And I asked someone yesterday, I said, do you know how many of these zombie oil wells there are in the US? And I got answers of, I don't know, thousands. There are 2.1 million zombie oil wells in the US, and the class action is now being taken against a few of those companies now. This is going to continue. So we talked about, or Ian talked about, the physical risks to business by not taking the right action and the missed opportunities of not taking the right action. But there's also the reputational risk of not taking the right action. So imagine a world where we had businesses that were all motivated to do the right things and were planning for a better future for our food system, but also with the backdrop of climate change, we've got another problem. And that is, what the world produces is not what the world needs to be eating in the future. And now this isn't, the graph on the right isn't necessarily a diet that is based on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It is what is a healthy diet as decided by Harvard. And it's pretty much the same around the world. We should be eating more fruit and veg, we should be eating less cereals, and we should be eating a lot less sugar. But the key thing is we're not producing that food. So I say, if we were to wave a magic wand, we wouldn't be able to manage this. And the biggest gap that we have is the gap around fruit and vegetables, the horticulture gap. So what are we going to do about that? Well, the future is botanic, as they say. This is actually a picture of a seed bank in Sussex. It's part of Kew Gardens, Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. And in there are 40,000 seeds, 40,000 species, rather, of seeds, and about 2 billion seeds. It's very different. Some of you may know of the Norwegian seed bank in Spitsbergen that also is managed by the Crop Trust, who are protecting seeds for the future. Very different crops are stored there. The interesting thing about this seed bank, and it was set up in partnership with the Crop Trust and with the seed bank in Norway, is that it's storing what's referred to as crop wild relatives. So these are the relatives that exist in the wild of our commercial crops. And because they exist in the wild, they are more genetically diverse than the commercial crops that have been really fine-tuned and have performed brilliantly in a very stable climate. But those crops do not have the breadth of diversity in their genetics to be able to suffer droughts, suffer extreme weather events that we've been hearing about earlier today. So I say, there is hope, they are there, but those crop wild relatives can only do what they do if somebody uses them. So there's this vast potential sitting there underground near Gatwick Airport that has some of the answers. And why? We've got all sorts of pest and disease, and some of you may remember the story around bananas and Panama disease in the 1950s. And basically, Panama disease wiped out global banana production. We've got the same thing happening again. So we've got black sigatoka virus in the Caribbean, affecting Caribbean banana producers. We've got the same thing with citrus fruits, with greening virus that is sweeping across Florida and South America and impacting citrus juice prices for things like orange juice and other commodities. There is, I suppose, a waiting list of pest and disease that climate change is going to basically support and supercharge, which we've got to be very vigilant about. But we haven't learnt the lessons from Panama disease in the 1950s. So whilst there are nearly 1,000 different species of banana that we know about, we grow one variety, the Cavendish, everywhere. And we might grow organic versions or fair trade versions or small ones or large ones, but they are all the Cavendish. So we have got a very vulnerable system. And I put a couple of very nice crop wild relatives of the banana there. And the blue one that is actually grown at Kew Gardens in one of the big palm houses tastes like vanilla ice cream. It's absolutely delicious. But there's not just the production of global commodity crops, and it's important in this. There is the crops that are grown by smallholders. And this is an important aspect of climate change that sometimes we forget about, and that is the smallholder producer. Smallholder producers are technically those farming less than 5 acres of land. They're earning around $2 a day, and they produce 35% of the world's food. Tea, coffee, sugar, even palm, and those things get forgotten, and they get forgotten because they are invisible in our supply chains as you go upstream, mainly because those things are consolidated by cooperatives or by national governments who run some of those supply chains. But their livelihoods depend on us buying those products, but also on being successful in combating climate change. But most of them are in the parts of the world that are going to be most impacted by climate change, and therefore they need our help. This is a great example of a third species of coffee. In Italy, we drink a lot of coffee, but we drink Arabicas and Robustas, and that's about it. But there are lots of species of coffee out there. Trouble is, most of them don't taste very nice. Coffea stenophila is a third variety that's somewhere halfway between an Arabica and a Robusta, and it tastes okay. And in a blend, it would be fabulous. The important thing is, this coffee can grow at 7 degrees increase in global temperatures. The other thing in there is one of the challenges, and this graph that's showing shade-grown coffee at the bottom is from the Smithsonian Institute, and they sell what they call bird-friendly coffee. And it's a bit of a tenuous link, but the bird-friendly coffee is coffee that's grown in the shade without cutting down the trees that increases the bird life. So linking bird lovers to coffee drinking is not so tenuous. But what is the crop wild relative challenge? This is some work that was done with the Crop Trust and Kew, and basically what the map shows is from light blue through greens and to red, the variety of 29 of the world's commercial crops that have really important crop wild relatives. And the reason for producing this heat map to show where this richness of genetic biodiversity is because that's where we need to focus on collecting those crop wild relatives, so that when the worst comes to the worst, we've got some of the tools that we need in those wild relatives to our commercial crops to basically combat climate change. So I will leave all these slides for you, and I've got some reading at the end, so if you are interested, you can delve into a bit more detail. But there's also the part of nature that has the answers that we don't think about, because we all understand what goes on the soil, on top of the soil, and the things that we can see. But the big growth area now is what we call dark nature, and this is the nature you can't see. And a lot of dark nature is now being looked at with what's being called environmental DNA, so eDNA. So what is in the soil that we can't see? What is in the water that we can't see? What is in the air that we can't see? And I say air because when we measure air quality, we measure chemicals and we measure physical particles. We don't measure the biological quality of air. And we know that that's really important for the air that we breathe and for our gut microbiome. And I put these mushrooms here because they are the 3 hot mushrooms of the moment. Turkey tail, lion's mane, and reishi. And they're the talk of the moment because mushroom sales around the world are growing exponentially because finally we've worked out what of those bioactive compounds are, those phytochemicals within the mushrooms that are so good for human health. So nutrition is moving beyond vitamin C, moving beyond sugars, moving beyond fibers into these active components of plants that really do benefit human health. And a good thing to remember in all of this is that 25% of the world's pharmaceuticals originate from tropical rainforest crops. So nature has always had these natural pharmaceuticals. It's just that we've never really studied them. And I'm using this as an example. It's a brand in the UK called Conquer, and it's basically about brain health. And this team have been working on some of the bioactive extracts from things like roseroot, turmeric, lemon balm, and so on, to basically look at the impact of those things on brain function. And the reason they're doing that is two reasons. One is a sport reason, because there's lots of concussion in sport, whether it's heading footballs, playing rugby, or even things like boxing. And there's a lot of research going on into how people participating in those sports can be protected, but also because we are aging. And the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs has basically predicted that 1 in 6 of us are going to be over 65 by 2050. So there's that whole use it or lose it, but what can you do? And this is an interesting piece because not only have they developed the products that you can drink as a liquid, a bit like a shot, but they have also created an app where you basically do brain function tests on a regular basis while you're taking these particular plant extracts. And that is a growing trend. And I suppose the most famous example of where science meets consumers, meets mobile phone applications is Zoe. And Zoe is a bit of a phenomenon in the UK. And you have to go back 25 years on Zoe to see where it all started. And it was Professor Tim Spector at King's College, and he did a study of 13,000 identical twins. And he tracked them through life and realized that their responses to food, even though these were genetically identical individuals, their responses to food were different. Allergies, intolerances, all sorts of things that were very real manifestations of a different response to food. And he knew that that couldn't be because of their different genetics, because they were genetically identical. It had to be that there was something else going on. And that's when all of the research on the gut microbiome started and how our gut bacteria, literally the trillions of bacteria, about 2.5 kilos the average person carries in their body, basically help to metabolize the food that we eat. Zoe then was not called Zoe at that time, was just as an academic study. It then became a citizen science project in COVID because King's College and Professor Spector were asked to do the work on COVID-19 and long-term COVID, and they are still tracking millions of COVID sufferers and the impact on their long-term health. And then 3 years ago, with all of that research and understanding what's been going on, they launched Zoe. So Zoe is a series of podcasts that are every week that millions of people listen to. You can sign up to Zoe and follow a program. While you follow that program, your blood is measured, your poo is measured, and for microbiome, and you wear a blood sugar monitor. And basically, your responses to the foods that you eat and you log create your personal profile. So it's absolute personal nutrition. The last count, 120,000 people were taking part in Zoe, and it's the biggest study of its kind of citizen science backed by academic research. So they've literally just published another paper on the gut microbiome and what that does for human health. They've now launched products with Marks & Spencer. You can buy a Zoe shot that has 5 different types of gut bacteria, and you can, say, have the shot, sign up for the program. And that whole citizen science, i.e. you are sharing your data with researchers in really highly reputable academic establishments, creating serious research papers. There have never been studies of this scale and of this kind, and it's doing good stuff. But, you know, that's a commercial opportunity that's doing great things for human health. But at the other end, if you're a Marks & Spencer, not only are you looking at the opportunities that all this provides, you're also thinking about what you need to be doing in the background. And I know Steve Johnson is going to talk later around the new challenges around corporate sustainability reporting and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, but there is also the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And this went through the European Parliament literally 24th of May. And what this means is that all businesses can no longer just ask a simple question of their supply chain partners. For example, is there any deforestation in your forest commodity supply chains like paper or palm oil or soya? You have actually got to show that you are doing something active to ensure that that is the reality. A bit like the zombie oil wells, the company that went bust had no money, no liability, but 4 companies up the supply chain, there is a big company that's making a lot of money that will potentially pay the price for those zombie oil wells. The same is true here, and it's the same with things like our Modern Slavery Act. So the question is, how on earth do you go about showing that you are a diligent business that has really, really worked hard on its duty of care? And that's easier said than done, because we are in an exponential growth phase of regulation. And I know that in my role as a regulator, that the complexity of what business has to deal with is huge. And we have to find better ways of dealing with that. Because if you think back 30 years, go back to the early 1990s, when things like fair trade, things like Forest Stewardship Council, things like Marine Stewardship Council, all of those certification schemes were launched, and they've grown over the years. In fact, there has never been more certificated FSC timber than ever. There's a massive amount of certificated product, but there's never been more deforestation. So it's clearly not working. So what is the answer to this? And the answer is some really good technology. And interestingly, a lot of this is using the Earth observation technologies that really are pretty granular these days and can give you some changes. So I've used an example there. It was a system developed by the Satellite Applications Catapult and the European Space Agency at Harwell in London called Ocean Mind. And basically, this is looking at the vessel monitoring signals from all of the shipping around the world. And as you know from Ian, there is a lot of shipping around the world. But it actually can identify that ship and knows if it's a fishing vessel. So it can identify the fishing vessel. It can then cross-reference that fishing vessel to basically its log, where it is logged, whether it's got any previous convictions for doing naughty things while at sea, mainly illegal fishing. And it also knows if it's got a fishing license for that particular fishery where it is. It knows whether that fishing license has also got a quota to trade. And it also knows whether that quota has been exceeded. So it basically can say, is that ship in the right place? But of course, the other thing is it fishing? So they've got some very clever algorithms that look at the way the ship is moving to say, is it a ship that is purseining? Is it trawling? Is it long-lining? What method of fishing is it using? And it can tell all of that in seconds. and can identify whether that vessel is basically fishing illegally. That's being used by governments all around the world. And it is just one example of how you might use technology and the services of a tech business to basically achieve your due diligence. There's the same thing on Forest Mind, exactly the same principles. And there is a thing, at the bottom here, this one, is Climate Trace. And Climate Trace is basically measuring methane emissions from space. And set up by Al Gore, as we know, his original inconvenient truth about climate change really raised awareness of this topic. But climate change can actually look at a factory, it can look at a motorway, it can look at all sorts of things and actually work out what is being emitted. So there is really, in all of this, no excuse. We have the technology to be diligent. And our job is to make sure we use everything at our fingertips to ensure that diligence. And that brings me to the point of data. And again, beautifully, Ian talked about how we share data, how we create the systemic picture of what is going on through data. And one of the things that's really working well in here is in the UK is government investment in this, in what's called a digital supply chain hub. And it's working with lots of, and I think potentially some people in this room might be working with them, on how data is used as a utility. As the goods flow through the system, the data flows with them. And that has been enabled in the UK with a new piece of legislation called the Electronic Trade Documents Act. That sounds really boring, I know, but the Electronic Trade Documents Act is only 3 pages long, best piece of legislation ever. But what it does is enables goods to flow seamlessly across borders, which is, as we know in the current climate, really important. And that data is the data that government wants, whether it's revenue, whether it's biosecurity, whatever the data, it's all can be there. The really interesting thing about that is it can also track all sorts of other data. So there's an organisation called Aggregate One. They are a South African business. They're operating in the fresh produce supply chain. They are now tracking with data millions of containers of fresh produce all over the world, not just from South Africa, across borders with information around pesticide use, information around food waste in the supply chain upstream, information about growers. That means that once that data has passed across the border, that data is available for retailers. And that's a really important part of the due diligence as well, is understanding all the way upstream all of those handoffs and are your supply chain partners in total doing the right thing? And this makes that possible. The other thing about this is all of the work that they've done shows that on average, supply chains that use data and share data and do all the things that Ian described in his S's are 30% more efficient. So there's a big productivity gain to be had here because these are the things that fall down the gaps and that are missing. So even if you didn't want to do this from a due diligence point of view, you should be doing this from a productivity and an efficiency point of view, and indeed traceability. And that's really important because the data, if it's good data and it's complete data, gives us opportunities with AI. I don't know how many people feel confident with AI. I certainly don't. But somebody told me there is a really nice piece of AI that's really where everybody is investing, or the big investors are, in a thing called Anthropic and Claude. And Claude is different because Claude, as an AI tool, has got ethics built in. And most AI doesn't, actually. If you look at some of the machine learning and AI that is being used at the moment, what AI has shown is that it can what's the best way to describe it? Lie. So in negotiations, what the machine learning has worked out is if I don't tell the truth in a negotiation, I can win the negotiation. So that then perpetuates the learning to not tell the truth in a negotiation because I will win it. Claude doesn't do that. Claude has got built-in ethics. So literally you can sign up to it. I signed up to it and said, hello, Judith, and what do you want to know about? But have a look at it and don't be scared of it. As long as you don't share your data, you'll be fine. But AI needs good data. So there is a real opportunity for our sector, but only with good data, rubbish in, rubbish out, as they say. But the other aspect of this, and again from the World Economic Forum and their risks register, is about the challenges of digital security, cybersecurity. This week in London, I think 5 hospitals had to cancel all of their operations because of a cyber attack. So literally thousands of people had their hospital appointments cancelled because everything just disappeared. And that's a challenge. But the bigger challenge is the big digital divide and the breakdown in social cohesion. Because what we are having now is the haves and have-nots of data. And so a big part of all of this is how does some of that data become open data, so it's not just the people that can afford the data that have the data to be able to exploit and optimize how we do things and reap the benefits of having data and reap the benefits of AI. So lots and lots of opportunities in this space, and I suppose it all comes together with one final opportunity, and that's the new barcode. And the new barcode is already out there, so some of the big brands are already using it. So GS1, which is the global barcode system that runs all the barcodes for food and indeed pharmaceuticals. They were very busy in COVID barcoding vaccines like no tomorrow. GS1 are creating a brand new barcode that goes live in 2027. And this barcode does a couple of things. It embeds all the information that the supply chain, or can embed the information the supply chain needs, beyond things like pack size, pack weight, identification numbers, all of those kind of things. It can track, it's already in some applications looking at food waste. In other applications, it's looking at product safety standards for import and export. The thing about this barcode, though, is that parts of the barcode can be public. So you would be able to scan this barcode with your mobile phone. Obviously, a lot of the data in there is commercially sensitive. It's private data. You wouldn't have access to that. But you would have access to who was the grower. Were they organic? Are they certified? Is this a fair trade supply chain? Is this a deforestation-free supply chain? And that is going to change the world. Because all of a sudden, it's not going to be about packaging and labeling. It's going to be about the truth and the real truth and the facts that are in that barcode. And it also means that that can happen really quickly because there is no legislation around this, which is why when you go and look at the licensees of barcode generators, they're doing some really exciting things in this space. So hold that thought, think about the possibilities for the future, and I just want to leave you with the fact that the future is already here. These things are happening, they are at our fingertips, but they are just not evenly distributed. So thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.